Well, I'm publishing a book called Paris Underwater, which is about the flood of the Seine River in Paris in 1910. And it's really the first book to tell the story of this dramatic flood, which was one of the worst disasters in the history of the city. I learned about the flood in 2005, in the summer of 2005, and I thought, oh, this sounds like an interesting project. And then it was that fall, the fall of 2005 was when Hurricane Katrina hit. And I started to think about the connections between the Paris flood and Hurricane Katrina. And we had students come to Rhodes who were at schools in New Orleans, and we had people who had evacuated from New Orleans who came to Memphis. So it was really something kind of in my mind because of what was going on here, but also I began to think about the sort of historical connections between Katrina and Paris. Looking at that story of the Paris flood and thinking about Katrina really helped me to think a lot about the idea of disasters and what happens when a city undergoes some kind of major catastrophe or crisis. And one of the things that I think I learned from that is the importance of community, the importance of having social networks. You find that the cities which survive disasters are the ones where the social networks are strong. And one of the things that happened in Paris was the fact that even though there was a lot of political disagreement, a lot of economic tension, that nevertheless people were able to pull together and survive because there was something about their sense of themselves as Parisians and of French people that allowed them to connect still with one another. And it's interesting because I think that one of the things that you see about New Orleans with Katrina is that the media representation was of a city falling apart. That in fact, there was a great deal of crisis and suffering, and there was. But one of the interesting and probably lesser told stories of Katrina is that there were also a lot of spontaneous acts of people working together and helping one another, and going out in boats and rescuing their neighbors. And that happened in Paris in the flood as well. People worked together to save their neighbors, to save strangers. Boats rode through the streets and picked people up. People built wooden walkways. The idea of strong communities, I think, is something that's very important for thinking about how a city can survive a disaster of something of the order of a major flood or of a hurricane. So our challenge, I think, is to find ways to keep those social ties strong so that if disaster strikes, that cities can bounce back and can recover.